Some pass away painlessly, but everyone in this video didn't. They felt every painful second of it. I'm Patrick, and I'll be covering brutal deaths, like someone who stepped on a nail and felt their own muscles breaking their spine, and another who had a chemical eat them alive for 30 hours in the most painful way imaginable. There was a routine that Theron Gavelka did for every new hire at the chemical blending facility, where he worked outside Newark, New Jersey. The crew called it the show. He'd wipe a benchtop spill with his bare hand, sniff a container from inches away, tap a pressure gauge with his knuckle, all while explaining what they should never do. It was pure theater. Everyone on the floor knew it. And unsurprisingly, the new hires always looked terrified, and the veterans just rolled their eyes. He ran through the whole thing the morning of October 6, 2014, for a trainee who'd started that week, less than an hour before the transfer that killed him. Theron was 43 and had been handling chemicals for 20 years, 11 at that facility. Transfers, dilutions, repackaging, all of it including hydrofluoric acid, 20 years with this stuff. He wasn't new to it, which is kind of the whole problem. The task that morning was a standard drum-to-drum HF transfer. Protocol called for acid-resistant gloves, face shield, and a chemical apron. He wore the apron and shield but skipped the gloves because a sticky gasket on the fitting needed bare-hand dexterity to seat properly. A small amount of concentrated HF splashed onto his left forearm during the connection, maybe the size of his palm. He wiped it off with a shop rag, rinsed at the eye wash station for about 30 seconds, and went right back to the transfer, which at that point might have had no pain at all. The skin might have been a little red, but honestly, nothing that looked like a real burn. He mentioned it to a coworker half an hour later, like it was nothing. And if you saw this happen, you wouldn't panic either. A little redness from a small splash, rinsed off within 30 seconds. There was genuinely nothing about that moment that looked like the beginning of a 30-hour death. Less than an hour before the splash, he was bare-handing a wipe down for the new kid's benefit. That detail broke something in me because the exact habit that made him casual about skin contact was still fresh in his muscle memory when it happened. About 2 hours later, Theron told his supervisor his forearm ached. Not a surface burn, something deeper, like a bone bruise. Within another hour, it was bad, like really bad. A sort of burning sensation coming from inside the arm, radiating outward. He told the shift nurse it felt like the bone was being crushed from the inside out. The facility called poison control and got him to a hospital. Here's what I didn't understand about HF until I dug into this case. It doesn't destroy skin on contact the way other acids do. It passes straight through, silently, reaches the bone, and starts binding to calcium. By the time the pain shows up, the fluoride ions are already deep inside, and there's really no viable procedure that pulls them back out. That's the part that makes HF different from basically every other chemical in that building. The hospital started calcium gluconate and IV calcium to fight the fluoride stripping calcium from his blood, levels already dropping. Pain unresponsive to standard painkillers, so they moved to opioids. The fluoride was eating through his calcium faster than the IV could put it back, and every nerve connected to that bone was firing non-stop. No ceiling, no off switch. That line in the toxicology report is the one I had to put down and come back to the next day. Over the next several hours, his forearm swelled and his heart rhythm went erratic as calcium depletion reached his cardiac muscle. The team tried pumping calcium solution directly into the arteries of the affected arm. His pain never dropped below the maximum on any assessment, not even once. Roughly 30 hours after a splash he wiped off with a rag, his heart went into an arrhythmia resuscitation couldn't fix. His heart stopped because his body ran out of calcium. That was the official cause. The fluoride got into his bones, leaked into his blood, and drained the one thing his heart needed to keep a steady rhythm. The facility was cited for PPE violations. Theron's training performances were entered as evidence of normalized, unsafe handling. An industry-wide HF safety bulletin followed. If that one made your skin crawl, the next one's the opposite kind of nightmare. No chemicals, no burns, just rock and gravity, and a guy who was fully conscious for 14 hours of it. One friend stayed at Corvin's ankles the entire time. 14 hours. He could hear Corvin's voice getting thicker as the blood pooled, and around hour 6 the responses got spotty. Then around hour 10 they suddenly stopped. But before all of that, before the rescue teams and the failed extraction attempts, it was just 3 guys driving out to a cave in rural eastern Tennessee on August 11th, 2016. 2 of them drove home. The cave was on private land, unmarked except for a hand-painted sign on a fence post. No maps, no management, no signage. At 22, Corvin Strawn was 3 months out of college and working data entry at an insurance firm in Lexington, Kentucky. He hated it, like genuinely hated it. It was the kind of job where you watch the clock and you think to yourself, how in the world has it been only 15 minutes? He lived for weekends. Every Friday he drove somewhere, climbing gyms, state parks, river trails, and came back with stories for the office. He kept a running list on his phone, things I did this month that weren't sitting at a desk, and showed it to anyone who'd look. He'd added the cave trip to the list before they even walked inside. His car was a beat-up Honda Civic with a cracked taillight, sat in the gravel pull-off for 3 days before anyone moved it. The group brought headlamps and a first aid kit. No helmets, no ropes, no comms. About 500 feet in, a side passage branched downward at a steep angle, narrow, maybe 18 inches across, dropping into darkness. Both friends passed. Corvin went in head first. He crawled down about 15 feet before the walls tightened and the angle steepened to roughly 60 degrees. His ribcage caught where the rock pinched inward on both sides. He tried to push past it, inhaled, and his chest lodged against the stone, exhaled, and it didn't free him. He called back that he was stuck, and yeah, that really was the whole moment. The one exhale that didn't even free him. Everything after this point is just time passing, I guess. And right here is where this one turns into something I wasn't prepared for. Because being stuck in a cave is one thing. Head first at a downward angle is completely different. His friends grabbed his ankles and pulled. He didn't move. The angle and friction made it impossible without risking spinal injury. The passage basically worked like a finger trap, which is a horrible way to describe it, but that's honestly the best comparison. Every exhale let his body settle a fraction deeper, and every inhale pressed his ribs harder into the narrowing. Blood started pooling in his skull within the first hour. Pressure behind his eyes, across his forehead, slow and constant. His friends could hear it in his voice, which got thicker as time went on. His face, visible to one friend who crawled partway into the opening with a light, was dark red and swollen. It really was completely different from what he looked like an hour before. Each breath got a little shallower. His own weight was pressing his chest into the stone while gravity fought every attempt to expand his lungs. He could talk. He could hear his friends. He could feel all of it. Honestly, this is the one I think about at 2 in the morning. Just a guy who crawled too far into a hole and gravity wouldn't let him back out. One friend stayed at his ankles talking to him. The other drove for cell service. A rescue team arrived 90 minutes later. They couldn't widen the passage without risking collapse. Rigged ankle harnesses and tried mechanical extraction. Nothing worked. His body had settled deeper during the wait, and getting him out now meant pulling his full weight upward through a gap that didn't fit his frame anymore. Head first, angled down, total darkness, fully conscious. There's no version of this I can describe that matches what those hours were. His responses got spotty around the 6-hour mark. Rescue teams rotated in pairs, working around his legs, never able to see his face. His breathing turned rapid and shallow, tiny sips of air against the weight of his own body. And unfortunately, he stopped responding past 10. They pronounced him dead in the passage roughly 14 hours after he crawled in. He spent 14 hours upside down in the dark, genuinely terrifying to even imagine. Cause of death was positional asphyxia, combined with cardiopulmonary failure from prolonged inversion. Blood pooling swelled his brain, while chest compression squeezed his breathing down to nothing. There was no single catastrophic moment. His body just gave out gradually, one system at a time. The landowner poured concrete over the entrance within 2 weeks. The county put out an advisory about unmapped caves on private land. His phone was recovered during extraction. The list was still open. Last entry, cave in Tennessee. If that one got to you because of the tight space, this next one's wide open. Open water, clear sky, warm morning. And she literally had the one thing that could have saved her sitting in her car the entire time. The Stinger suit was in her trunk. 3-minute walk from the water, right next to her research kit. It was there the morning of January 14th, 2017. The same morning, she went swimming without it. Sable Kinnear was a marine biologist, 35, at a coastal research station in northern Queensland, Australia. 8 years studying nearshore ecosystems, having published papers on marine envenomation, and even knew box jellyfish, irukandji, stonefish, saltwater crocs like the back of her hand. Genuinely one of the last people you'd expect to die from a sting. That's why what happens next left me entirely speechless. On her days off, she swam without the suit, and her colleagues brought it up to her more than once. She always said the same thing, that her personal time was for swimming like a regular person and not a scientist. The beach she went to had no stinger nets, no lifeguard, no seasonal closure signage. She'd been swimming there for years without incident. The morning was warm, still, the water flat and glassy. She entered the water alone around mid-morning. A couple on the sand about 150 feet away told investigators they watched her swim out maybe 60 feet from shore, pause and start moving erratically. Arms breaking the surface, body twisting, direction changing sharply. A 3-minute walk, that's how far the suit was from where she went in. I'm just going to leave it there because, truthfully, I just can't find the right words to describe what I think. Sable got herself to shore and collapsed at the waterline. The couple reached her within a minute. Raised welts ran across her torso, arms, and neck, consistent with a mature box jellyfish. She was conscious, breathing fast, and making a sound the female witness described as sustained and involuntary. Something that didn't stop between breaths. Gonna be hard to picture, but it wasn't screaming exactly. Just a constant sound of some sort. Box jellyfish venom hits the cardiovascular system and the nervous system at the same time. The sting itself is immediately severe, but what follows is worse. Extreme hypertension, fluid in the lungs, erratic heart rhythm, and a neurological effect documented as a feeling of impending doom. That's not a metaphor, by the way. It's an actual documented thing the venom does to your brain. You become 100% convinced you're dying right now, and there's nothing anyone can say to talk you out of it. People have literally begged doctors to just let them die because the feeling is that overwhelming. That's a real thing that happens with this sting. She stayed conscious on the beach for over 30 minutes. Paramedics arrived within 20 and started IV access, pain management, and vinegar to neutralize remaining tentacle material. Her heart rhythm kept getting worse. A helicopter was called. It was en route when her heart stopped. Resuscitation went on for over 20 minutes. It didn't work. She made it to shore. The helicopter was in the air, and none of it changed a thing. The cause of death was her heart giving out from the venom. The amount of sting coverage on her body was enough that doctors said it was almost certainly lethal no matter what. Toxicology came back clean. No alcohol, no drugs, totally nothing wrong with her judgment. She just went swimming on her day off at a beach she'd been to 100 times. Something about this just wrecks a part of me I honestly didn't even think I had. The research station banned solo recreational swimming at field-adjacent beaches during jellyfish season. Warning signs and a closure gate went up within 6 months. Her car sat in the lot for 2 days. The Stinger suit was still in the trunk. God, that one was tough. But if you think that was hard to process, this next one involves a 19-year-old kid with a trade school letter in his wallet and a material that genuinely will not come off once it touches you. He'd shown the letter to everyone on the crew at least once. Folded up in his wallet, a trade school acceptance for an HVAC program starting in September. The foreman had seen it twice, the machine operator 3 times. The kid was proud of it and didn't hide it. Caius Bridwell was 19. He'd finished a general studies certificate at a community college in Hattiesburg, Mississippi that spring and needed summer money for his first semester of trade school. A neighbor who ran a small road crew offered him seasonal work at $14 an hour, resurfacing a 2-lane highway in rural DeSoto County. He started in early June 2015. The rest of the crew had been doing this work for years. Caius was the only one under 30, and honestly, it wasn't even close. The crew described him as basically too eager for his own good, always volunteering, always moving, and rarely even waited for full instructions before jumping in. The foreman said he even had to tell the kid to slow down nearly every shift. Also said Caius never complained about the heat or the hours, which in Mississippi in June is honestly kind of impressive. The tar kettle sat about 15 feet behind the paving line, an open-top steel vessel on a tow trailer heating liquid asphalt to over 300 degrees. No perimeter guard, no railing, no barrier. Just a narrow gravel shoulder between the kettle and the road edge. And considering the kettle had been set up the same way on every job, nobody really had ever questioned the layout or had a reason to. That's the part that gets me about a lot of these workplace ones. It's not like someone looked at the setup and thought, yeah, this is fine. Nobody looked at the setup at all. It had always been that way, so it kept being that way. Until it wasn't. June 18th, midday. Caius was carrying a bucket of cold patch along the shoulder behind the kettle. Every person on that crew had seen the letter. Every one of them knew where he was headed in September. The gravel shifted under his boot. His footing broke backward. He dropped the bucket, and his back hit the rim. Momentum took him over the edge. He went into the tar from mid-back to upper thighs, which is roughly 14 inches deep. His arms still stayed above the rim, and two guys grabbed his forearms and hauled him out in under 10 seconds. But at that point, it didn't matter anymore. At 300+ degrees, liquid asphalt tar doesn't cool on contact. It bonds to skin and clothing, holds its heat for minutes, and can't be removed without taking tissue with it. That's what makes this different from every other burn in this video. It's not just heat, it's heat that will not let go. I keep going back to those 10 seconds. They got him out so fast, and it changed absolutely nothing. He was airlifted to a burn center. Full-thickness burns across roughly 40% of his body, all posterior. The tar had cooled by the time he got there, but it was still stuck to his skin. They had to remove it surgically, basically peeling the material off layer by layer. Even with heavy sedation, burn doctors say that's one of the most painful things they do. His stress markers stayed critically elevated despite maximum medication. He lived 41 hours, but his kidneys went first, then everything else followed. His body just couldn't handle the damage from burns that bad, and he never left the burn unit. The wallet survived, though, and the letter was still folded inside. I don't have anything to add to that, honestly. The letter was just still in there. The investigation found no perimeter guard and no safety briefing. The foreman was charged. The contractor lost its highway contract. His mother filed a wrongful death claim that settled before trial. If that one sat heavy with you, just wait, because the next one doesn't take hours or even minutes, yet it might still be one of the most painful ones on the list. One step off a boardwalk and everything after that is just physics. The crust broke under his right foot first, then his left leg dropped. Within seconds, he was waist-deep in water that shouldn't even be called water. That was September 23, 2018, in a geothermal basin in the backcountry of a national park out west. But before the ground gave way and the screaming started, there was just a guy trying to frame a photo on his phone. Evander Goss had a thing he did before every photo. He'd pull out his phone and frame the shot on screen first, lining everything up through the cheap lens before committing to the real glass. His mother said she watched him do it hundreds of times from the kitchen window while he photographed birds in the backyard. It was just how he worked. Phone first, camera second, every single time. Evander was 28 and living back at his parents' place outside Boise, Idaho, trying to make wildlife photography work. Picked up shifts at a sporting goods store to pay for gas and lenses. His mom told investigators he spent more on camera gear than food, which, if you've ever met someone trying to break into photography, sounds about right. He visited the basin with a friend. The area really looked like it was from another planet. Mineral crust in white and gray stretched in every direction, punctuated by steaming vents and pools in blues and greens that looked almost artificial. Thin boardwalks on timber pilings were the only safe path. Signs warned visitors not to leave the path. The ground could give way without warning, and I'll be real. If you showed me a photo of that crust, I'd have stepped on it too. His friend stayed on the boardwalk. Evander stepped off and walked about 6 feet toward a vivid blue-green pool, placing his boots on what looked like solid mineral crust. Phone out, framing a shot he hadn't even committed to yet. Not even his real camera, just the phone preview. That might be the smallest, most ordinary gesture I've ever seen lead to something this bad. He fell into water that regularly hits 200 degrees or higher with a pH so acidic it starts dissolving skin pretty much on contact. This isn't water that just burns you, it's basically melting you and cooking you at the same time. His friend heard him before he saw what happened. An immediate, involuntary sound unlike anything he'd ever heard from another person. Evander got his arms onto the surrounding crust and pushed his upper body partway above the waterline. The crust held for a few seconds under his forearms. His friend screamed for help and ran toward other hikers on the boardwalk. Nobody could reach him without stepping onto the same ground that had just collapsed. 2 hikers tried to extend a trekking pole, but the distance was too far. The crust gave way further. He slid deeper. His sounds became continuous and then faded. Within minutes, he stopped moving. His friend, watching from the boardwalk maybe 10 feet away, told investigators Evander was motionless well before any ranger got there. 10 feet, close enough to touch him if the ground had been solid. My brain puts me on that boardwalk every time and I have to force it to stop. Rangers arrived within 25 minutes. Recovery took the rest of the afternoon. Water temperature at the entry point measured 205 degrees. pH was 1.4. For context, battery acid is around 0.8. This was very close to that. At that temperature and acidity, the damage to everything below the waterline was pretty much instant. He went into shock and his heart gave out shortly after. The park closed the section and installed physical barriers. His camera bag was on the boardwalk railing. The phone was never found. If that one was fast, this next one is the slow version. And honestly, the thing that makes it hardest to sit through isn't the burn itself. It's where it happened, how far help was, and how long he had to wait. 8 months before it blew, someone flagged the pipe. That's how this one starts. Not with the man, not with the burn, but with a piece of paper in a filing cabinet that nobody acted on. A corroded joint fitting on a 6-inch steam line. Logged, marked non-critical, deferred. 8 months while the corrosion kept going. That request was still there on the morning of February 7th, 2013, at a small municipal power station in rural Montana. The man who walked past it that morning had been walking past it for 23 years. There was a laminated card clipped to the brim of Doran Selke's hard hat. He'd written his retirement countdown on it in his own handwriting and updated it every week. 23 months to go. Co-workers would tap it when they walked by. Became this whole thing on the floor, half joke, half genuinely sweet. That morning, someone had written almost there on the card in blue marker underneath his number. Doran was 52 and had been a maintenance tech at the station for 23 years. Basically, had the same route every shift. Went to the boiler room, turbine hall, steam corridors, cooling systems, panels. He'd walked those corridors so many times, guys on the crew said he could do it in the dark. He actually proved it sometimes, clicking his flashlight off and walking a dozen paces before turning it back on. That's how comfortable he really was in there. That morning, he was walking a steam distribution corridor, a narrow passage lined with high-pressure pipes running superheated steam to the turbine. The fitting that had been sitting in that filing cabinet for 8 months was right above him. That card, with almost there written on it in someone's friendly handwriting, the same morning. I found the photo in the investigation file and had to close the folder for a while. The fitting failed as Doran walked within arm's reach. Superheated steam, over 400 degrees and invisible, blasted into the corridor. It hit him across his right arm, the right side of his neck and face, and his upper chest. Here's the thing about steam burns that most people don't realize. They're way worse than boiling water. When steam touches your skin, it turns back into liquid, and that change releases a ton of extra heat straight into the deeper layers. It basically skips past the surface and cooks you from the inside. He got knocked sideways into the wall, but stayed conscious. Managed to drag himself about 15 feet out of the steam path before his legs quit. A co-worker found Doran sitting against the wall, awake and talking but unable to stand. Burns covered roughly 35% of his upper body. There was no doctor on site. The nearest burn center with real pain management was 3+ hours by road, and the helicopter was grounded by sustained winds over 40 miles an hour. The dispatch log showed 3 separate calls checking on the helicopter status. Same answer every time. Wind hadn't let up. 3 calls about the same helicopter, I feel like I could sense the panic just reading the log. 18 hours with nothing strong enough to touch what he was feeling. That's the sentence from the transfer report I haven't gotten past. He was conscious for most of it. The facility basically became a waiting room for something nobody there could fix. Paramedics from the nearest volunteer station did what they could, which the receiving burn team later called completely inadequate. A co-worker who stayed through the night said Doran asked about his wife twice and about the pipe once. He reached the burn center about 14 hours after the rupture, died roughly 18 hours after the steam hit him. His body couldn't recover from burns that severe after waiting that long for treatment. The union filed a grievance pointing to the deferred repair as negligence. The station was shut down for months. Management faced heavy fines. His pension was paid in full to his wife. The laminated card went into the investigation record. All right, so this next one is going to trick you, and I'm telling you that up front, because I'm willing to bet the thing you think kills him doesn't. But let's see. He called his daughter from the hospital bed and sounded fine. Tired, but fine. Made a joke about the food, asked about her math test, told her he'd be home in a few days. That phone call is where most people would assume this story ends. It doesn't end there. Every day at lunch, same time, Eziel Cardona called his daughter. Maricela was only 14. She'd told her mom that if her dad didn't call by 12:15, something was wrong. 9 months straight, he hadn't missed a single call. That was pretty much his thing. Eziel was 47. He'd spent 15 years running a warehouse in Phoenix before the divorce. Relocated to central New Mexico to be near his kids, and took a construction labor job with a local contractor. Less money, zero seniority, less experience than anyone else on the crew. He was the oldest guy on site doing the most junior work. And no matter how you look at it, it didn't make sense. But the site was 10 minutes from Maricela's school, and that was the whole reason he took it. April 2nd, 2017. A residential foundation pour, single-family home on the edge of town. Temporary scaffolding along the perimeter for finishing work, rented and assembled on site by the crew themselves. The investigation later found it was improperly braced at several points. Nobody on the crew had formal training in scaffold assembly. Below the platform, rebar stakes stuck up from the grid, about 3 feet tall, not one capped on any of them. It's not a suggestion, it's code, and it exists specifically to prevent what happened next. I've said it before on this channel, but the cheapest fixes are always the ones nobody does. Eziel was on the scaffolding about 7 feet up when a plank shifted under him. He reached for the guardrail and it gave way. He fell backward into the foundation. A single rebar stake went through his lower left abdomen. He landed on the slab with the bar through him, responsive. A co-worker about 20 feet away said Eziel looked down at the bar, looked up at the foreman, and said something the guy couldn't quite make out from that distance. Paramedics stabilized the bar and transported him. Surgeons removed it and repaired the abdominal wall and large intestine. Surgery went well. Stable in recovery, talking, alert. This is where I thought it was all over too. Had a bad fall, but surgery went well, and he was home in a week, but just keep watching. That was the phone call from the opening, the one that sounded totally ordinary. The next 3 days are what this story is actually about. The bar had punched through his large intestine. Despite the repair, gut bacteria had already seeded into the peritoneal cavity. Within 48 hours, peritonitis set in, and once it starts, it spreads across every organ surface with no natural stopping point. His pain blew past everything they were giving him and kept climbing. There's no comfortable position with peritonitis, nowhere to put your body where it hurts less. Surgeons basically say it's one of the worst things a conscious person can feel. Your whole abdomen just becomes this one massive source of pain that doesn't level off. It just keeps getting worse. By day 2, his vitals were tanking. Surgeons went back in for an emergency washout. It wasn't enough. His body went into septic shock. 3 days from jokes about hospital food to septic shock. I read that timeline 3 times because my brain kept trying to make it longer than it actually was. He died on the 3rd day after surgery. Septic shock from the infection that spread through his abdomen after the intestine was punctured. The rebar didn't kill him. The bacteria that got in through the hole it made did slowly, over 3 days, and the pain never once went down. The contractor was cited for uncapped rebar and bad scaffolding. fined, and lost their license. Maricella's last phone call was referenced in the wrongful death filing. His ex-wife moved both kids back to Phoenix within 2 months. This last one I saved for the end on purpose. No machine, no fall, no chemical, just a nail in a barn floor. And honestly, it might be the worst one in the whole video. The list was still on the refrigerator when investigators came through the house, handwritten, held up by a magnet shaped like a goat, titled, "Not Worth a Doctor Visit." 17 entries in her handwriting. A bee sting, a bruised shin, a deep splinter, a pan burn. Her daughter Adele took a photo of it for the file. Orleen Gasson was 58 and had spent 29 years teaching middle school science before retiring to run a goat farm on 12 acres outside Murfreesboro, Tennessee. She ran the whole thing herself. She had 34 goats, a vegetable garden, and a roadside stand on Saturdays. Adele drove up from Nashville twice a month. Orleen apparently hadn't seen a doctor for anything beyond a basic physical in years. That just wasn't who she was. November 3rd, 2015. She was cleaning a pen in the barn and stepped on a nail sticking out of a rotted board. It went through her boot and into the bottom of her left foot. She went inside, cleaned it with hydrogen peroxide, wrapped it in gauze, and walked back out to finish her morning chores. Entry number 18, written on the list below the pan burn from October. A nail in the foot, right under a pan burn. She hadn't had a tetanus booster in over 15 years. 15 years. This story made me check my own vaccine record after this one. And honestly, you should too. 17 entries above it, where she was right. The 18th killed her, and her daughter photographed the proof. About 8 days later, her jaw felt stiff at breakfast, a tightness she couldn't stretch out. She told Adele on the phone that evening she figured it was just teeth grinding in her sleep. By the next morning, she could barely open her mouth. Drove herself to urgent care, which honestly, for a woman who keeps that kind of list on her fridge, is the most predictable thing ever. The doctor recognized it immediately and got her admitted. Tetanus, from Clostridium tetani bacteria that got in through the puncture wound and spent the past week multiplying. The toxin it produces locks onto nerve endings and forces muscles to contract. You can't override it with willpower, not even with medication, not with anything. Once it starts in the jaw, it just keeps moving down through the rest of the body. Within 2 days, the spasms had spread to her neck, back, abdomen, arms, and legs. Tetanus spasms aren't cramped, trust me. They're full-body convulsions where opposing muscles fire at the same time with enough force to fracture the patient's own bones. Orleen's medical records noted 2 vertebral compression fractures caused purely by the spasms. Her own muscles broke her own spine. She was conscious through all of it. The spasms came in waves triggered by sound, light, touch, or sometimes nothing at all. There's no predicting when the next one hits. The waiting between waves is what got to me. Knowing another one is coming, but not when, is one of the worst situations you could ever be in. Maximum dose antitoxin, sedatives, and muscle relaxants slowed the episodes, but couldn't stop them. Between waves, her body stayed locked up, back arched, arms pulled in, jaw clamped shut. Basically, her own body turning on itself while she's fully awake and can't do a thing about it. That's tetanus in simple terms. Her muscles snapped her own vertebrae, and she was conscious the entire time. Out of fear of even slightly demeaning what she went through, I still haven't found the right words for that. On the 5th day, a sustained spasm locked her diaphragm and intercostal muscles. She stopped breathing. 12 days, a nail in a barn floor to respiratory failure. That's the distance between entry 17 and entry 18 on that list. The arrest caused brain damage from oxygen deprivation. She died the following morning, roughly 12 days after stepping on the nail. Official cause was respiratory failure from tetanus. The spasms had fractured her vertebrae, and the breathing arrest caused brain damage on top of everything else. The county health department put out an advisory about tetanus shots, aimed at people in rural areas and farm workers. Adele closed the farm within the year. The goats went to a neighbor. The photo of the fridge list ended up in regional health department materials. 17 entries where she was right, 1 where she wasn't.